We are recording. And we are live, just waiting for folks to populate the room.
Malcolm has said he will be with us, so I'm hoping he will show up shortly. I don't see Malcolm in the attendees yet either.
Yeah, I don't either. I know he sometimes has issues with the technology. I'm not sure if that's an issue tonight.
Are we allowed to do the general business of 386 High Street while we're waiting for him, or does he need to be present for that as well?
You should be able to do that one. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no, actually, I'm sorry. It looks like you only have 3 here at present, correct?
Yeah, Malcolm's the necessary fourth.
Yeah. And you haven't heard from him saying he wouldn't be in attendance. We certainly didn't. I don't think.
He has confirmed his attendance extremely recently, within the past hour.
Yeah.
I don't know if Caitlin has his phone number. I do not.
Hi, I'm seeing him in the attendees list right now.
Oh, he's there? Oh, great.
Looks like he just came in. I am promoting him to panelist.
Great. So Andy, let me know when we can start.
And Malcolm, if you could let us know when your mic is connected. And Malcolm, I noticed previously you sometimes are having issues with the mic. It looks like you may be having an issue right now based on what I'm seeing in the display. So I'm wondering if you might need to use the call-in number that's available in order to speak, depending on what your computer issues are. And just as a reminder for everybody, since I've seen this happen a couple of times, I think mainly with Malcolm, is if you're having an issue with the audio, there is a dial-in number that you can use to solve that, at least as an interim measure.
Hi, Malcolm.
I'm here.
Great.
I'm here.
Great. Andy, are we live now?
You are good.
Great. Okay, good evening. This is the August 12th, 2021 meeting of the Newburyport Historical Commission. I am Patricia Pickett, Vice Chair, sitting in for Glenn Richards, who is Chair. Calling the roll, Commissioner Peter McNamee. Peter?
Present.
Commissioner Joe Morgan.
Here.
Commissioner Malcolm Carnwath.
Here.
And I'm here, Patricia Pecknick, and we have a quorum. Absent are members Christopher Fay, Mark Sendron, and Chair Glenn Richards. We have 4 items on the agenda, and with the permission of the applicants present, we would like to move the 386 High Street painting proposal up to the top of the agenda because the nature of that request will allow us to proceed very quickly. Does any applicant object to our spending the first few minutes hearing that matter and then otherwise proceeding in order? Any applicants object? If the commission agrees to that, can we have a motion to move the 386 High Street hearing to the top of the agenda?
So moved.
A second?
Second, this is Peter.
Thank you, Peter. The motion passes. Let's start with that application. The owners of 386 High, which is the 1790 Plummer Dyer House, are seeking permission to paint the house, which is under a preservation restriction. Painting is identified in the PR as a major alteration that goes beyond ordinary maintenance and repair. Can we hear from Heather Brooks and Jesse Hunfeld, please? You have 15 minutes between the two of you if you need, but I don't imagine it will take more than 5 minutes. Andy, can you unmute the Heather Brooks and Jesse Hunfeld? They're unmuted. If they're not unmuted yet, are they here even?
Yeah, I have attempted to unmute. I'm hoping that they can.
Heather Brooks?
There. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. Yeah, I guess we're just looking to paint the trim on the house. I have just the description of the work that Jesse was proposing to do, how he was going to do it. And you can see we do need, just some maintenance done, basically.
Thank you very much. Yes. We've all reviewed the PR, and I know some of us have been over to the property to look at it. Does anyone on the commission have any questions about the painting proposal? Malcolm, you might want to mute yourself if you don't intend to speak. Anyone? Although the phrase pressure wash appears in the proposal, I understand, Ms. Brooks, that Mr. Hunfeld said he's doing a hose rinse at most and not power washing. Is that right?
Yeah, I checked in with him about that, and that's what he said that he was going to be doing.
Okay, that's important to us because the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation of Historic Homes states that power washing can damage the historic materials of the building. And so would someone on the commission like to make a motion to approve the painting on 386 High Street on the condition that the historic house not be subject to power washing?
So moved.
Is there a second for that?
I second that. This is Joe.
Great. So your vote, Mr. Morgan?
I say yes, I approve.
Mr. McNamee, your vote?
Yes.
And Mr. Carnwath, your vote?
Okay, yes.
And my vote is yes as well. And so thank you. You may proceed with the painting under the terms of the PR. Thank you very much for your time and good luck with that project.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we're going to move on to our 3 demolition delay applications. The procedure will be identical for all 3. First, we vote on whether the property is historically significant. If it is, there will be a public hearing, during which time we will hear the applicant's 15-minute presentation. We will then hear from the public. We'll ask any questions we have. We'll deliberate among ourselves and vote on whether or not the house is preferably preserved. And then we will either release the building for demolition or impose the demolition delay. Under demolition delay, the city seeks to preserve historic building forms, meaning dimension, scale, and roof profile, and character defining architectural features, style, fenestration, materials, trim. We recognize the desire of homeowners to use their properties in new ways, and we do support the expansion and alteration if it's compatible with the historic character of the structure and the streetscape. Before reviewing plans, the commission has to determine first on 11 Bromfield Street if that structure is historically significant. Does anyone on the commission have anything to say before we take that vote and move on possibly to a public hearing on it? I will contribute that the information that we have so far is that that property is listed in our district data sheets as pre-1870. It does appear on the Sanborn map of 1888. In my deed research, I haven't really had the time to go back before 1878, but back then the house was owned by Paul Lunt. He ran the twine and rope factory that manufactured rope for the shipbuilding industry. The history of the Lunt family in Newburyport has been well documented by local historians. We know that the Lunt rope walk opened in 1837, and that 7, 9, 11, and 19, and possibly this house were grouped together and appear to have all been built between 1830 and the late 1860s. Would someone like to make a motion that this house is historically significant and should be considered for preservation?
I'll make that motion. This is Peter.
Peter, thank you. Can someone second that, please?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Malcolm. Mr. Morgan, what is your vote on that?
Yes.
And Peter, your vote?
Yes.
Malcolm?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. The house has been deemed historically significant. Therefore, let's open the public hearing on 11 Bromfield Street. The applicant states they are seeking to demolish the roof, build up over the existing house and porch, increase the ridge height by 3 feet, add attic level dormers, and relocate the entrance to the front of the building.
And could I, Chair?
Of course.
Could I just ask for clarification? I assume that was for both significant for preservation purposes and preferred for preservation, right?
Considered historically significant and considered for preservation.
Okay, thank you. And so we do have, I think, Jeff and Joel here this evening, if you'd like to address the commission.
And we could give about 15 minutes if you care to divide that time in any way that you want between the two of you, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, this is Jeff Solomon, owner, speaking right now. So I'll kick things off with my own sort of take on the historical nature and some intro to sort of what we're hoping to achieve in a little bit more detail, and then I'll turn it over to Joel to give more detail on the plan and the specific selections and style and materials and so forth. So if you want to, is it Andy? Could you please advance the slide?
So you can just say next for next slide if you want, just to speed things up. Feel free.
Sure. Thanks. Great. So my wife and I bought the home in 2018. We've been here for about 3 years. We're currently seeking, to accommodate our growing family, to create some additional living space, additional bedroom storage, as well as to sort of accommodate, the needs that I think a lot of folks have identified in the past 18 months or so of fully remote work and having a home office as a reality. And so in order to do that, we seek to do a second story addition over the existing enclosed front porch, which we do not believe to be, or which is not original to the structure. Doing so will also include a roof line change, all of which is kind of detailed a little bit, or is provided in more detail sort of later on in the presentation. That was some good additional information, more than I was able to find. So thank you for that additional context. Historically, what we found was, that it was listed on the historical property survey as pre-1870, though other records, such as when we bought the house, indicated around 1900. Obviously, that's not the case. But we do have, notes in here to indicate the number of changes that have occurred to the structure over the course of its lifetime, and that we we effectively believe that much of the original character of the structure no longer remains. And as such, we request the permission to sort of proceed with the designs as drawn. Next, please. So I want to make absolutely clear sort of the scope based on the existing elevations of the property and the site plan. So if you look at the view of the existing elevation on the right-hand side, you can see that there is a what is currently an enclosed front porch, which, like I said, is not original to the building. The original portion of the building, which if you look at the Sanborn maps, shows basically a square footprint. It is basically the part of the building without the porch and without the sunroom in the rear. I think it's important to note that the existing roof line, the shed roof in the back is not original. In fact, that was done about 20 years ago. It's unclear whether there was a salt box roof on this originally, or if it was just sort of, two stories in the front with a lower roof section in the back when it was originally built. But the fact remains that was the profile as you see today does not reflect much of the original profile. The orange portion is what would be subject to demolition. Again, removing and rebuilding the front porch, or what is currently the front porch, and enabling a second story addition over the top of that. And then effectively changing the roof line to move the ridge line, the primary ridge line, excuse me, up by about 3.5 feet, and introducing a new roof line with a gabled end facing the street. And so that is kind of the scope of the demolition. Next slide, please. We can move on from there. It is noted in the historic property survey as minor contributing, and though I know this is not new information to anyone on the commission, I thought it was worth calling out the definition of minor contributing, which is that they are similar in scale and materials to their neighbors, but which have undergone major alterations such that their period of origin cannot be readily determined. And I think it's worth noting that this determination was made in, I believe, 1984, which was actually prior to the series of several changes that happened after that. Worth noting also that no Form B exists for the property, and we don't have any other known historical significance. And I mentioned earlier our other records list circa 1900, but obviously based on Patricia's research, that is not the case. Next slide, please. This is sort of what I wanted to call out in a lot of detail. So, originally we had a 25 by 25 foot, roughly square footprint of the house. There was at some point, though we weren't able to find documentation on it, there was the addition and enclosure and subsequent enclosure of the front porch. The exact date of that is unknown, but it's clearly not part of the original structure. There was a second story addition in the rear portion of the house circa 2000, which included the replacement of the original of that portion of the roof with a shed roof. And then the center chimney of this center chimney colonial was actually removed within the last 5 years, I believe, when the previous owners replaced the roof of the house. A couple of other, less significant details. The middle second story window, we don't believe to be original based on a mismatch between its size and the size of the other two, and the rear sunroom addition, although that's not very, that's not necessarily relevant for the proposal. But the point being here, this building has gone through a substantial set of changes over its lifetime, and we believe that that has sort of left very little of the original stylistic attributes and characteristics of it to remain. Joel, do you want to make any additional comments on that?
It looks like Joel is muted. Joel, you'll have to unmute on your end as well.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, why don't you just continue, Jeff, for a little bit longer, and I think I can jump in a little bit further down your presentation.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so this is just showing on the placement of the lot on Bromfield Street, fifth building up from from Water Street. We can go to the next slide, please. Just for reference in the Sanborn maps here, where you see it's actually numbered 7, even though currently it's 11, the 5th building up. And you can sort of see that it is just that original square portion. It looks like there was actually a different structure in the 1914 map added to the back, but that's well, it's certainly not the sunroom that's there today, because that was added in the last 20 years or so. Next slide, please. I don't have a whole lot of commentary to make on the next set of slides. This is basically providing neighborhood context. So if we want to just progress through these, I can kind of add a caption. So this is showing the home in the context of the 2 nearest neighbors. This is looking up Bromfield Street, the same side as number 11, towards High Street. And this is looking down towards Water Street. The next 2 show the opposite side of the street. This is looking down towards Water Street. And then the final one shows going back towards High Street again on the opposite side of the street. And at this point, I'll sort of turn it over to Joel to talk through in more detail the plans that we have drawn up for construction and demolition.
Okay, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yes, go right ahead.
Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, so you saw the existing, the home, both in photographs and in the drawings. And so the plan for this house is to bring it up to today's code, but create a home that looks like it's pre-1900, if not mid-1800s to early 1800s. Much of the original house, as Jeff had mentioned, is gone. The original front wall that was behind the porch no longer exists. That's all open. You can see that in the existing floor plans. That's gone. The original roof line for the back half of the 25 square, obviously that's not gone. That had a large addition put on top of that and sort of had one of those kooky salt box shed dormer roofs that is really inappropriate for this particular house. So in order to expand, not only just for the family, but to also bring things up to code in terms of the existing floor plan, it was necessary to go up over the porch. So yes, the porch will be demoed because it literally is sitting on pilings, and we'll need to put a frost wall footing across the front and then build that up. That then will all be remaining open to the main house. There'll be a up to code egress stair, which you'll see in the plans off to the side. That'll take them up to the 2nd floor, where we can provide up to 3 bedrooms. And then for future expansion, there's a 3rd floor potential build out, which we'd like to at least rough in and frame, which keeps a nice colonial character, which I believe the entire house is now returning to with the new design. The reason for the sort of Georgian gable front roof is actually referencing the house on either side. So you have the Victorian on one side, and you have sort of the sideways colonial next door. And as shown, the roof line is going to be way under the Victorian next door, which sort of towers over this house. And it'll be roughly even with the house next door. The center chimney will be returned to the house really as I don't want to say it's a fake chimney, but it'll at some point house the fittings for an interior gas fireplace. The exterior will be a true water-struck brick veneer with a traditional colonial chimney cap, which will be probably built out of concrete. It'll be open on the top though, which will be different from normal chimneys, just so it can vent out. The house will maintain the 3 windows across the top. They'll all be the same size. They'll have traditional clapboards, and the shutters will be wood, painted high gloss, hinged and tied back. The lower level will return the front entrance slightly recessed into the center of the front wall, and the 2 smaller triple colonial windows to either side kind of give it almost you would see that a lot when you go through old streets in England or whatever. If you're right on the sidewalk, your windows tend to be a little higher and smaller. The new roof line, the main profile of the house, will return to a reverse salt box. And the front wall is 1.5 stories before that pediment front elevation is constructed. And the half story is needed in order for the staircase to clear from the landing to get them up to the second floor. The new ridge will be actually posted down and structurally resting on the existing back wall of the original second floor. And colonial windows will be returned to center on that ridge line. Then to the back where they added a 4-season room some time ago, there'll be a second floor, which will, as you can see in the plans, will provide a sitting area and nursery as children are born right off of the master bedroom. And again, the third floor is pretty minor. We're only adding about 275 square feet up there. And I did want to talk about, someone had mentioned something about the square footage and the house being out of scale. And the existing house right now, as it stands, is 1,520 square feet. The 2 second floor additions, the front elevation change and the small addition over the 4-season room, add an additional 320 square feet to the house, bringing the habitable space to 1,840 on the first 2 floors. With the attic build out, and that's again future, probably when children are older, the attic will come to 275 square feet, bringing the total square footage of the home to 2,115 square feet. Compared to the other homes in the neighborhood, the average that I calculated was about 2,100 square feet is the average home. There are many 2 families that each side is running about 1,800 square feet, bringing those up to 3,600 square feet. There are some homes, I believe the one next door is comparable square footage to this house now, which is 1,500, and it's listed as no finished attic. So in terms of the architecture style, if you read the notes on the elevation, the other thing I want to bring back is we found some wide tongue and groove 8-inch to the weather clapboards on the side of the existing part of the original house. And I want to return that look to the side and also put it up into the pediment area and with some nice, nice trim work. All the materials are going to be natural, except we'll use an approved architectural shingle, which every house that's being renovated right now in the area is putting on. Wood shingles are a little cost prohibitive. We'll have actual gas lanterns on each side of the door. There'll be the flower boxes restored to the new windows. And as I said, with the door recessed in, you will not be stepping out onto the sidewalk like many of the homes across the street. Literally, their granite stoop is on the sidewalk. They luckily do have 18 inches before you hit the public sidewalk, and then another planting bed between the sidewalk and the road, which they've taken care of pretty nicely. So that's where the design is generated from, not believing that this is really a historical property that could be restored to what it was. You would have to tear more of the house down to restore it to what it was than to create this new home, which I believe will look like it was an original structure in Newburyport built at the time of the shipping. And with the owner's commitment to material choices and the architecture, I think it's not going to look too far off from these drawings. And I know someone objected that it would look brand new. Well, it will look as new as we can make it. However, it'll also be historically new. I mean, I see a lot of older homes, even in my neighborhood, that once they're worked on and paint scraped and repainted and windows replaced, they look brand new when it's done right. So that's really all I had to say, unless you have any questions for me or if Jeff wants to continue on.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's good. We will also give you a little bit of time at the end and circle back and hear from you again a little bit. We're always eager to hear from the public as well. So let's open the public comment period. If you would like to speak, can you please push the raise hand icon on the screen, and Planning Director Andy Port will unmute you on our end, and then you will have to unmute yourself. If anyone would like to speak, just state your name and address. Try to keep comments to 2 or 3 minutes, and you can express support or opposition or concern or curiosity. Andy?
And the first person we have is Tom Colterjohn.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Tom Coulter-John, 64 Federal Street, co-president of the Newburyport Preservation Trust. I've read over the plans. I listened to and watched the presentation, but I have to tell you, I'm stunned by the amount of the proposed changes to this historic structure. I would have hoped that the owners would do something to bring back and to retain the historic aspect of this property, but that's not what they've done. The changes would basically obliterate the original structure and change it into something that I don't recognize. Assuming that I can understand properly the graphic presentation, it almost looks like a quasi Greek revival front projection on the building, and then a Georgian roof line with a center chimney in the back of it. It's stunning. I guess I'm at a loss for words as to how to describe it. My only suggestion is that you turn down this proposal and take the time to look at the building and work with the owners and the architect to come up with something plausible for this historic structure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coulter-John.
Is there anybody else who would like to raise their hand and speak to the commission? We have Stephanie Nikitich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephanie Nikitich, 93 High Street. I agree with Tom. I'm also sympathetic with the letter that you received from an abutter. So part of the character of a building, even though it might have been modified over the years, part of its character is its form and massing. And Newburyport is going through, and has been for a few years, the sort of upsizing of its historically modest-sized homes. And this is not just a change to our historical fabric, it's a change to the diversity that's possible for this community, that we are losing modest-sized homes. So I thought the information about the added square footage was interesting. I think that if the Historical Commission will go ahead with a site visit and ask for actual these dimensions on architectural drawings, that might be helpful. But indeed, as Tom Coulter-John noted, there's also an aspect to this project that looks like it might be the Frankensteining of a historic building. So you don't know quite what it is, but it is not, but you'll be able to tell this is not a historical building. And it is on a very historical street and close to the water, which is a very historical part of Newburyport. So I do hope you will actually look at the house yourselves and work with the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to address the commission? See no other takers, Chair.
Okay, let's close the public comment period and move on to questions from the commission. So in light of the applicant's presentation, also input from the public and your own review of the materials, do you have any questions for the applicant?
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Carnwath.
I'm just You know, when I first looked at this house, I drove by it today, and I was curious because it looks to me like a lot of really old antiques that are 3 windows across the top. And I was wondering if if the architect or owner knows whether the framing in the old part of the house that remains is post and beam or not. Timber framing. Does anybody know that?
Joel, I see you've raised your hand. Do you want to address the commission?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, there are timbers. If you go into that where that porch was enclosed and then they remove the front wall of the house, there are 2 different timber posts. It's sort of, one looks like it was put in later than another one, just when they took the wall out probably. And just in the 2 front room corners, those 2, the corners are built out, which indicates, and they're not chases for electric or plumbing or anything like that. They're those would be corner beams. However, there's nothing else visible in whatever's left of the house beyond that front.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at the existing house, you'll see in this photo here, you'll see those 2 gable end windows. So those represent the midline of the original ridge. So the second floor only went over to half of the 25 feet. So it was, it was about 12 and a half feet wide. So it would have been a house that had a walk up. The existing stair is like a ladder. It's a 8/8 pitch. And so it would have just been a simple 2 bedrooms on either side of a stair. And then over the years, obviously people just started adding on to it in order to make it a livable home. I'm not saying that the home is not livable, but there are some code issues in there that, the staircase probably not good for, anyone to be walking up and down, including the one to the attic, which is why we're proposing new stairs. And in terms of the hybrid look, that was just a choice. At the time we thought it was turn of the century. Which is when everything sort of went eclectic. It was everything was being a revival. And you can go through Newburyport and you see lots of center chimney colonials that were built sideways on their lot. And then suddenly they put up a Greek revival front on it when that became the fad. So you'll see a lot of center door, 5 windows across the top. And then the front, just the front, has the giant, corner boards, the door over to one side, and the fan light window up in the gable. And that was just, it was fashionable. This whole street is really a hybrid of styles. There are some that I wouldn't really assign a style to. Clearly the blue house next door is clearly sort of a Queen Anne shingle stick style. It's cute, but it's mammoth. And I do want to address some of the points. I know that there was a letter that was sent in that, objected that it will not look like the quaint small colonial home so typical in the South End. Well, I drove around there and there are lots of people adding on to their homes. And there's a few cute little tiny houses. Absolutely. I'm not denying that. Almost like a fishing village look to it, but not many. There's a lot of towering 3-story 2 families.
Mr. Solomon, may I interrupt you a little bit? This is the question and answer.
Oh, this is Mr. Gagnon.
Mr. Gagnon, sorry, it's not meant to be an extension of the presentation time. It's also not meant to be the beginning of our own deliberations. It's just a really quick 5 minutes when we can ask factual questions.
Okay. I
and then
apologize.
we'll deliberate. We'll give you time at the end to say, to say more along that line. Mr. Conworth, you have another question?
No.
Okay. Mr. Morgan, do you have a question?
Yes, and a comment. Normally, I believe, Chair, we see more detailed demolition calculations. I'm having difficulty understanding, and I think we should understand quantitatively exactly what's being proposed for demolition.
Joe, you're frozen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I know that as we vote a structure as historically significant, we don't identify all of the pieces or the pieces that may not be historically significant. But I think we should start with a document.
Yeah, Joe, you're freezing again.
I can speak a little bit to that calculation. So
Yeah, I think we just
prior
want to know the total percentage of demo that will be done.
yeah, off the top of my head, I believe it was between 23 and 24%. I know it was under the 25% threshold. That was a criteria that we need to maintain.
Chair, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can, Mr. Morgan.
Can I suggest that Joe turn off his video? That may help.
While we're waiting for him, Peter, do you have a question while we're waiting for Mr. Morgan to come back on?
I have, well, the timbers that the owner was referring to before in answer to Malcolm's question, do they have anything to do with hints of the original center entrance, if there was one? I guess that's a question for Joel.
Yes, if you can hear me. No, there is, when you step inside of this, you don't see any framing that would indicate we're a door. We can only guess that it was a center door, you know.
So when you walk onto that porch, you're walking into not just the porch, you're walking onto the majority of the first floor?
Yes, it's all wide open.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions, Chair.
Okay, shall we wait for Joe or move on?
Well, I'm hoping for a little
There he
bit.
is. Hi, Joe. Peter suggested turning off your video, and that
I did that, yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I believe we are owed the drawings that explicitly show which walls are going to be demolished. If the applicant wants to indicate those areas that he thinks should be excluded from that calculation, that would be fine. But I do believe that we should see it as a document presented to the commission for our evaluation and our discussion. That's my comment. I have no comments on the architectural styles or density or height or size. All that is perfectly fine. I would just like that procedurally we're certain that we have a building here that is
Joe, we've lost Joe again.
Chair, if I can step back in, are we just doing questions right now or
Yes, I was about
commentary?
to close the questions and move to our deliberation, so
Okay.
perhaps Mr. Morgan will pop back in time for that. So if there are no more questions, let's take the time we need. It's in the city's interest and the applicant's interest for us to go through the points that we want to make. This is a time for the commission to share our analysis, each one of us, about how the proposal comports or does not comport with the Secretary of the Interior standards for the rehabilitation of historic structures. So we ask the applicant to just listen quietly until we have finished. And at that time, we'll allow you just a couple minutes to say whatever else you would like about this proposal. So Mr. McNamee, would you have something to say during this time of deliberation?
I'm sorry, Chair, who did you address?
I was addressing you, Peter.
Okay, my phone cut out for just a second. My comments are that I agree with pieces of what both Malcolm and Joe have said. Like Joe, I have no issue with the architectural style. I think it's a handsome building. I think it's balanced, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little quirky in some ways, but that doesn't necessarily rub me the wrong way. But I also agree with Malcolm in that, and Tom Kolzerjan and Steffi Nekitich, that there's nothing reminiscent of the original building. And the applicant made the point that driving around Newburyport, you'll see a lot of that. And I don't think that's necessarily a supporting point in favor of the work proposed, but part of the issue. He also commented that there are a few small buildings reminiscent of a fishing village, or words to that effect, but only a few of them. And I agree with him, and that's part of the problem. You know, I think if we get to the point where Newburyport is nothing but large homes, we've lost something. So while I do like the design, I think it's inappropriate. I think a more appropriate design would be more reminiscent of the original structure. And I don't know the zoning. I don't know whether or not it's possible to provide the additional space that they're looking for by going out the back of the building. But this is too much of a departure. This is not the same building at all. So that's what I've got for now.
Thank you, Mr. McNamee. Yes. Mr. Morgan, are you back on?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry that I've been cutting out. I changed locations. I'm back to where I was, so hopefully I've got a stable connection now. So I just wanted to reiterate, because perhaps you missed my last comment, is that I guess because Peter mentioned that I had no objections with the proposed design. My objection is the loss of the historical structure, and in order to preserve, which is our mission, as much of the historical structure, which now has been voted historical, I think that we need to see the detailed documentation that designates exactly the scope of demolition, and then use that as a yardstick for determining whether this is an appropriate response to the existing historical structure.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Carnwath?
Yeah, I'm torn. I mean, I like the new design, but I think it has nothing to do with preserving the antique quality of the original house. And, you know, there are several very old houses that are post and beam that are 3 windows across the top on the second floor, and maybe a central door on the first floor with flanked by windows on either side. And several of them are on, for example, on Union Street, Upper Lime Street, on the Newbury side of the street rather than, or the Ocean side of the street. I'm kind of betwixt and between. I mean, I kind of like this design, but I also kind of feel like it doesn't fit in this location. If that means anything to anybody, I like the look of the original house with the 3 windows across the front, and I'd love to see the porch removed and turned back into something that looks like the original structure. I mean, I'm kind of betwixt and between. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yes, it is helpful, Malcolm. Thank you very much. For me, I guess, you know, the house history for 17 Bromfield Street is posted on our district data sheets. And that house history is drawn from the history of the Lunt family in America. And it makes the argument that, quote, the beauty of the district is in juxtaposing large and small buildings on a streetscape. It is important that such structures be preserved as a legacy of the city's history. Mr. McNamee said the same thing. So I agree with that. And with him, I find that what is proposed is an overwhelming transformation of a very simple house form into a large new contemporary house. I do understand the desire to adapt a house to contemporary needs, but I also agree with Mr. McNamee's suggestion that there is available a room in the back to expand the living area that way. The Secretary's standards, in fact, do address that kind of alteration in the rear. The standards do not contemplate this sort of demolition of the entire roof to accommodate so much new construction that it really changes the scale and massing and style of the house. It's like a second house being built on top of the first. So expanding of the yard, again, you use part of the yard, but our preservation zoning ordinances are all about keeping alterations as unobtrusive as possible from the street. So I would favor the use of the yard, expanding the footprint and protecting the streetscape that way. I don't know whether it'd be easier to get ZBA relief on the issue that you mentioned of encroaching on the only compliant setback than to get the upward extension anyway. But from the perspective of preservation, going up 3 feet to me is not appropriate. I did hear the argument being made that the historic interior staircase needs to be brought up to code, and that the rebuilding of the staircase is part of what necessitates the new roof height. But under the Massachusetts existing building code for stairs and railings, if the building is less than 3,000 square feet, the existing staircase does not need to comply with the contemporary building code. I'm concerned that the house is being taken from minor contributing to completely non-contributing. And I think, as has been said by others, I might like the design. It might be the most beautiful house in a suburb. I don't think it makes sense here. I don't understand that pedimented sort of roof section that Mr. Coulter John mentioned. I heard the architect use the word Georgian and colonial and reverse salt box. And I'm thinking about the fact that this house is so close to 8 Bromfield from 1750, 12 Bromfield is 1750 to 1775, and that it really belongs in that context, and that bringing it back to something, of its day would be more appropriate. If no one else on the commission has any deliberations, then we can close our deliberations and give the applicant just 2 or 3 minutes to respond. I think, we've all been over the application many times and we've really given it a lot of thought. But if the applicant would like to say something, either one of you, both of you, just for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll allow the public the same opportunity, that would be great. So let's close up our deliberations and invite the applicants to speak.
I don't have too much to add personally, so.
Mr. Solomon, okay.
If Joel, yeah, I would invite Joel to speak if he has anything else to add.
Mr. Gagnon?
Could we ask for a continuance while we reconsider design on this project?
I think it's appropriate for us to vote on it, and then you can come back. You have a whole year to come back under the demo delay. You can come back in 2 weeks with a new design. If that, thinking about the feedback that you're getting here.
Oh, okay. So as long as we're not locked out of the process.
No, you're not. Actually,
Oh,
Mr. Gagnon, if we impose the demo delay, if we do, that in effect is a perpetual continuance for 12 months. You have the next 12 months to come back.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, so the continuances, that's sort of a ZBA language and process. For us, it's, we decide whether the structure as it is should be preferably preserved. And we either release it for demolition or we impose the demolition delay, and then you have a year. You have a year to come back if you choose to.
If I may, can I just ask a question?
Of course.
Someone had mentioned that it would be preferable to, restore the front porch as a porch. That would remove 200 square feet from the home. So if there was some way to take the existing structure, return a center entrance facing the street, maintain the second floor look, just maybe even out the windows, or, well, maybe not, I don't know. And if we're able to go out back to a certain point, I mean, they've got some land back there, but does that sound like something that maybe would, I mean, it'd be very simple.
Let me ask the others on the commission first.
Okay.
Peter, Joe, Malcolm.
So in other words, what you would do would be remove the porch and put the front of the house back where it was originally and expand out the back. Is that what you were thinking? And a central door on the front?
No, what I was thinking is keeping the enclosed porch, because that is square footage for the main house. That's all being used as a as an entry, because if the, with the current setup, if you put the front door back, which we're not even sure where that is, because there's nothing, I can only assume it's in the center, but I don't know. I don't have any photos of the original house, and there's no evidence left behind of what was there. So I would like to retain the square footage that's currently there, just sort of bring it back to more of a, not looking like an enclosed porch. And then come up with some way to add the extra square footage and the new stair to a new addition off the back. I don't think there's any way to ever really bring this back 100% to what it was.
I would like to see that. I think that would be, you know, I would anticipate looking at that much more favorably than the plan that we've seen now. Just speaking for myself, I don't know if Mr. Morgan and Mr. McNamee have anything to add about that.
The porch is 200 square feet of living area, roughly.
It is.
I mean, would you be able to put 200 square feet on the back of the building and remove the porch and put the front of the house just as a flat?
That I would have to discuss that with the owners.
Sure. No, I understand.
Mr. Morgan, your hand is up, and then Mr. McNamee. Joe?
Peter, go ahead. You're up first.
Thanks, Joe. I'm just a little uncomfortable with participating in the design process in that way. It's if I were to give my honest answer, I think it should go back to its original facade, because that porch is clearly not original and does nothing for the building. And while I realize that's kind of difficult for the owners and the architects and whatnot, not to have design input from the commission, it's such a subjective matter. You know, we've got a design in front of us that's really quite good for somewhere else, but not good for here. And to make suggestions of a very subjective, on such a subjective topic, it could come back with an entirely different idea that isn't really reminiscent of what we're talking about. So as much as I can say is, while it's unfortunate to lose the 200 square feet, if I had my druthers, this building would go back to just a plain flat front with the center entrance and do what could be done out back. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan?
Yeah, so I agree and disagree with Commissioner McNamee. I agree we shouldn't probably be getting into the details of the design here, but I actually happened to tour this building in 2018 when it was for sale, and I thought it was actually a pretty charming space. It is a very congested, and the upper floor is kind of chaotic. It's hard. There's no circulation, and one room sort of spills into another. So that was the problem. That was the most difficult part of this house that I recall. The first floor, though, I thought was really charming. It was open and it had a lot of light, and that light was coming from the rear as well as from the front along that enclosed porch area. Now, the porch may or may not be original, but it may actually be considered historical now that it's been part of this building for a while. And we are allowed, as I recall, to consider additions and changes to original buildings to be also considered as part of the historic structure and fabric of the building. So I think it all depends whether we keep that piece or not, depends on what a future design might look like. My sense is that the main block of the building should be preserved, and any changes should really be focused toward the rear. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. So it sounds like, to the architect, it sounds like all four of us are looking at the expansion going into the rear rather than up, and that you've gotten different ideas about what should happen to the porch. Can we open public comment again just for 1 minute in case anyone in the public would like to respond to any of what's been said? I think Mr. Coulter John's hand is up. Let's open public comment again briefly. Andy, can you unmute?
We have Tom Coulterjohn.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I simply would encourage you to impose the demolition delay and to work with this applicant for a better outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, let's close public comment then. And based on the content of our deliberations, it sounds like the commission finds sufficient architectural and historical merit in deeming the house preferably preserved, that the commission would not vote this evening to approve the plan as presented, but will instead impose the demolition delay and of course encourage the applicants to return at their convenience with revised plans. Is someone prepared to make a motion that the structure is preferably preserved and the demolition delay be imposed?
So moved.
Thank you. Seconded by?
By Joe Morgan.
Joe Morgan, thank you very much. And how do you vote on that, Mr. McNamee?
Yes.
Mr. Carnwath?
Yes.
Mr. Morgan?
Yes.
I vote yes as well. The demolition delay is imposed. The applicant is welcome to appear at a future date with revised plans for our review. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your advice and comments.
Thank you. The next demo delay application is 430 Winter Street. And before reviewing the plans, the commission must determine whether or not this property is historically significant. I will just say first, it took me a while to find out that the Form B is on the Form B for 28 Winter Street, since the Danforth family owned both houses. So on the application, it says 1850. Of course, that's always the default date. I'm in the late 1700s in the deed research when it was the Silas Parker House. I learned that the Danforth family owned the house for almost the entire 19th century, ran restaurants and grocery stores, and the rear addition appears on the Sanborn map of 1888. Does anyone else on the commission have something to add about whether or not the house is historically significant? And then we will vote on whether it should also be considered for preservation. Can we then have a motion that the house is historically significant and should be considered for preservation?
I'll make that motion. This is Peter.
Thank you, Mr. McNamee. A second for that, please.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Malcolm. And Joe, how do you vote on that?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Malcolm?
Yes.
I vote that way as well then. Given that we have found the house historically significant and considered for preservation, we will now move on to the public hearing. The applicant states that they're seeking to demolish the roof of the addition, raise the roof height, demolish windows, reconfigure a window and door location, and other things that the applicant will detail. So the public hearing for 30 Winter is now open, and we invite Jeff Horn, Jean Allen, and Eric Primack to present for 15 minutes in total, divided however you'd like between the three of you. Thank you.
This is Eric Primack. Good evening. Can you hear me all?
Yes, we
Yep.
can, sir.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you. I'll be doing the presentation. Jeff Horn is the general contractor and Jean Allen, the architect. They're here a little bit for support in case you have any questions in reference, anything for them. But I'll generally be giving the presentation myself. I agree with what you said on the Form B. It also took me a little while to find it as well. So I would have no doubt as to the historical significance of this house. It was certainly a once proud Georgian home that's fallen into some serious disrepair. And as I said, my intention is to not only restore it respectfully, but to bring the rooms into use for modern families in regards to headroom. I'm requesting to remove the existing rear shed roof line of the structure and extend upward the second floor walls and roof to improve the ceiling height. The back section of the home, I don't believe was added at some point later. Obviously, the home is, 1800 change. And the back section actually steps down on the second floor, steps down from the rear of the house. And the headroom is 6 feet or less. So you've really got a couple of rooms up there that are not much use except for maybe small children's rooms. So the existing structure, single-family Georgian house, consists of, as I said, a 2-story front section with a gambrel roof and a 2-story rear section with a shed roof, which was added after the original construction. Proposed plan would be to remove the existing rear shed roof line, extend upward the second floor walls and roof to create usable space with greater headroom. Second story front windows will also need to be demolished, just small, to increase the size to conform to existing building code. Otherwise, I would gladly leave the 12/8 which exists now. Rear facing section will have demo to change both the window and the French door locations and to add one of each. But it actually makes it more symmetrical once we get along to looking at the elevations. I'll explain that. The right side will have demo to change location of a second floor window to adjust for the new roof height. The existing footprint and all setbacks would remain as existing. I'm not changing the streetscape of the house one bit. I plan to keep totally with the historical characteristics. Maintain the historical magnificence of this once proud house, I should say. Want to keep all existing side doors, front doors, all existing clap, all wood trim associated, restore, replace when necessary. The original windows will be kept and or replaced when needed, as well as continued throughout the second floor rear extension. There's quite a variety of 6/6, 9/6, 12/12, 12/8, and they'll all be replaced with energy rating, simulated divided light windows, and exterior flat stock casing. As you can see, the house sits very tight next to both the butters on the left and the right. There's some decent space in the backyard, but the front is also right up against the street. This is from the. I lose that for a sec. Sorry. This is from the Mass Historical Commission, which lists, as you mentioned, the Danforth home next door, and you can see the 28 and 30 next to it. So they mention it, and I think in page 2, but they don't say much else on it. It's just assessor's card. What's this? I get it. Keep going. Okay. So we take a look at the elevations. Okay, if you want to roll down to slide 11. We have the existing front elevation. If you want to look at the next slide, the proposed front elevation is exactly the same, with just slightly larger windows on the second floor. The next slide shows the demolition needed to adjust for those windows. Next slide is the existing rear elevation. As you can see, that small shed that bumps off the back there is a much lower second floor. That chimney that's in the middle is also pretty much about to collapse. So we intend to take that down as well. But we will leave the other 2 chimneys, and I expect to not only keep them, but restore them to working. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the proposed rear elevation where we're raising that shed to make the roof taller, and that's going to now align with the left side, so that the 4 windows across the top go in a row, and the added French door at the bottom, which will give it more light. That's basically taking up the one in the center, is basically taking up the space where the chimney was. There was an old like a beehive oven in there, but it's pretty banged up. The next one will show you the demolition needed to create that rear elevation. You go to the next, the existing right side. And the proposed right side, where we're keep the characteristics of the whole front section. And we're just raising up that back section. So we're removing the chimney and adding one more window. And obviously raising up that window that's on the second floor. The next slide shows you the demo that's needed for that. And then lastly, we're on to the left side elevation, which somewhat mirrors the right. Again, taking away that chimney, raising up that back section, adding another window, but keeping everything else the same, including that side door. And we're only demoing one small section of window there. Now see some photos. As you can see, this thing is pretty rundown, beyond rundown. Needs a lot of love. There's the picture. Next is the picture of the rear section. Next slide is the right side view. As you can see how tight it is to number 28. The left side view shows the same, how tight it is there. That's a rear right side looking over from Washington Street. It's hard to get, as you know, the houses are very close together. I could only get a picture from in between 28's main structure and its garage. You can see that small shed. Next picture here is along Washington Street. And looking south towards going up Winter Street. And that's across on the other side of Route 1, the next picture. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Permek. Very, very nice. Thank you. Let's hear from the public. Can we open public comment, please? And I will rely on Planning Director Andy Port to unmute you, and then you'll need to unmute yourselves. You can use the raise hand icon on the screen.
And the first person we have is Tom Colderjohn.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Tom Colderjohn, 64 Federal Street, co-president of the Newburyport Preservation Trust. I have a few comments, one of which concerns the changes, especially to the front windows on the second floor. I don't see why they would be changed. If they're changed, you would throw off the proportions. Often on a Georgian, the second floor windows are smaller, although these are quite large. These are 12/8s. I think changing them from 12/8s to 12/12s distorts the shape, and you're changing the size of the glass. I think that's the wrong thing to do, and certainly I don't believe the code requires that. Although I've heard comments about, the fire department requirement and so forth. There is nothing in the International Building Code that requires it. And I think it would distort the building by changing it. I think the existing windows, openings, and I don't know about the condition of the windows themselves, but certainly 12/8 is the proper size for the second floor windows. Another comment I would like to make is concerning the rear elevation. It just doesn't seem as though it's the proper height in the rear. First, I hate to see the chimney being lost. I know generally you can't see that, from the public, but I always hate to see a chimney lost. But I think the applicant's going up awfully high, unnecessarily high, and I think it should be brought down. And the pitch on that raised portion should be steeper. It should be a somewhat elevated pitch. It looks almost flat now. I would also encourage the commission to get down clearly what the building materials are. He has indicated that he was going to keep the wooden clapboards. I would make sure that that's very clear, and that we don't end up with hardy plank or some other inappropriate material in this building. And I close with one question, and that is, I believe it's a single family, and I'm wondering if the intent of the applicant is to go to the zoning board and try to make this into a two-family, which would certainly change the nature of the building. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I respond to the gentleman?
No, this is just public comment period. If you're a member,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Is there somebody else in the public who?
Yes, next person we have is Stephanie Nikitich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephanie Nikitich, 93 High Street. So I have admired this building and its partner building for 40 years. And I realize it has gotten into bad shape, but it is still a very beautiful building. And I was heartsick to learn that it is in the hands of someone who is not known in Newburyport for restoration. So I agree with all of Mr. Coulter-John's comments. I will note that the rear of the building is visible from a public way. It's visible from the rail trail. So I also appreciate the Historical Commission sort of looks at the whole building, no matter its public visibility, but in fact, both the front and the rear are highly visible to the public on public ways. So what I am hoping will happen is that the Historical Commission will take a much closer look at this, that you will go on a site visit, that you will work with the developer to ensure, as Mr. Coulter-John said, that the building materials are highly specified, and that some of the changes that he says, that Mr. Coulter-John said, could be better or are not needed, might be included in a new plan. So please go on a site visit, impose the delay so that you can work with the developer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Porter, is there anybody else in public comment?
No other hands raised at this time.
Thank you. So public comment is now closed, and let's move to questions from the commission. In light of the applicant's presentation, the input of the public, and your review of the materials, please ask any questions for the applicant. Perhaps there are questions posed by members of the public that you also would like answers to. And I will say that this is not meant to be an extension of the time for the applicant's presentation, nor the beginning of our own deliberations. So if we have factual questions, this is the time to ask them. Anyone have any questions?
Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Peter.
My eye was drawn to the same thing as Mr. Coulter-John's. So I would ask the applicant, is this in fact a code compliance issue? Have we looked into that? Do we know that that is required to change the windows as dramatically as is proposed? I would hate to see that happen, because also it would throw off the sense of weight and massing that this building has. It is a beautiful building, and I don't understand why those would need to be extended down. If there is a fire code regulation where it's enforced, which is enforced, then that may be a different thing, but I haven't heard that before. And everything else I have is comments. So that's really the primary thing. Yeah, that's all I have. Everything else is comments.
I was told that it is fire code. Those front rooms would be bedrooms and the bottom sashes do not open up high enough to comply with the current codes. As I mentioned in my statement, I would have been more than happy to keep those windows as 12/8. I agree
would
with
think
you.
so. That's just additional
I agree
work.
with you. They're beautiful. But
Yeah.
I was told, and my architect might chime in here, that building codes do not allow it. I need to have bigger openings. Those bottom sashes do not open tall enough.
Correct. That's the reason why the larger windows were proposed. We need at least 3.3 square feet of area in order to egress through a bedroom window. And we're not sure that these windows, the bottom sash will accommodate egress. We haven't been able to get into those bedrooms so that we can actually measure. But when we can confirm that, once we are able to get into the building, we will measure the opening to make sure that there is the appropriate bedroom egress.
And if it works, I'm happy to keep them.
Yeah, I would just ask that code citation be made part of the application.
Okay, that's no problem.
Thank you, Peter. Mr. Morgan.
Thank you. My observation is that there seems to be that the building seems to have there's some questions about its condition. I think Mr. Primack mentioned that there's some masonry that's in bad shape. I'm wondering about the foundation. I'm worrying about generally the general structural state of the building, and I would lobby that we get a conditions report from a structural engineer before we approve any changes to the proposed roof modifications, which I think also means there's going to be a floor level change in the rear portion, in the shed portion. I don't object to it architecturally, but I think that there may be more extensive demo possibly due to existing conditions.
The foundation is actually in very good shape, surprisingly.
Thank you, Mr. Primack.
Yeah.
Malcolm, do you have a question?
Yeah, I think that there's a in terms of building codes, I think there are exceptions for antique houses, with the intent being we not paint a mustache on the Mona Lisa if we can help it. You know what I mean? So I'm not sure that I would encourage the applicant to look into that, because I think there are exceptions for antique houses. This is a house that's had these windows for 221 years. And to say now that they're unsafe and we have to change the character of the building, I don't think is accurate. So I would encourage the applicant to look into that.
I'm happy to look into it. Generally, when you do renovations, you have to bring things up to current code. It's not about that anybody would come over and give a violation because it's not in compliance now. It has to do with the construction portion of it. Whenever you do a renovation, you have to bring it up to the energy codes. You have to bring it up to the safety codes. So it's more about bringing it up to current codes than it is about history.
I know. Mr. Primack, can I ask you what will be the total square footage? I know now it's 2,532 square.
Hey, brother.
And what will it be?
It's going to be the same. We're not changing the thing. The only reason we're trying to do this is to get some headspace out of that back second floor. which is really unusable right now.
Okay, and what is I know you had said that you expected the demolition at this point in the process to be under 25%. What are have you calculated the percentages?
Yeah, everything is, excuse me, I think we came in under 10. We've got 8.5 square feet on the front. We've got 101 on the rear. I had it wrote down. We had 36, so about 145. And then on the left side, we have 20. So we're at about 170 square feet max.
Okay.
What's the
That's
percentage though, Eric?
below. 170 divided by 2,500. Anybody? Sorry. I had it on the application. I'm sorry. Divided by 2,532.
Okay, thank you.
6.7%.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
If there are no more questions from the commission, it would be nice to move into our deliberations and review this proposal as it comports with the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. Again, the applicant and public, of course, will be listening in, but this is a closed discussion among commissioners. And when we're finished, we'll give you another few minutes to speak. So
Can I say anything else before the deliberation?
sure, yes, sure.
Okay. In question to Mr. Coltajohn's, again, where he said about the windows, again, I go back to, the code. If I don't have to change them and the code is not there, then I will absolutely keep them, and I have no problem with that. I think that the rear elevation is exactly what it needs to be, because it lines up with the bump out left side of the house, which was the original portion of the house. If you look at that existing rear elevation again, slide 15, slide 14, existing. And then if you look at the proposed, you'll see how now I'm making, that goes up to the existing second floor on the left side. So that all lines up across. I don't think the roof, we're not going super high. We're not above that. We're far from above that gable end. We're keeping that gable end in the rear. The only distinguishing thing that you're not going to see from looking at the rear of this house now versus in 6 months from now will be that chimney in the middle. And you'll see, an extra window and an extra French door. In regard to, sorry, I didn't catch her name. That she was upset that somebody of Newburyport wasn't doing this house. This is probably the 5th or 6th historic home that I've done in the last several years. And I've done them all as I've claimed. If I say I'm going to do the clapboard, that's what I do. If I say I'm putting simulated divided light windows, that's what I do. If you'd like, I can give you the addresses of some of the houses that I've recently done, and let you talk to the people that are now living in them.
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay. Let's begin our deliberations. Anyone on the commission like to go first? Mr. Carnwath, what say you?
What are we deciding?
We're just discussing among ourselves whether or not we think this comports with the Secretary of the Interior Standards, whether we think that the project does justice to the house historically and in the streetscape and from the rail trail. Any thoughts you have about it, or should I come back to you?
Come back to me.
Okay. Mr. McNamee.
Always takes me a moment to find my mute button. Sorry. I appreciate Mr. Primek's comments on the windows, his openness to not making that change if possible. I can imagine that only saves him money, so so much the better for him. The work in the back, Ms. Nikitech comments on it is visible to the rail trail, and It is visible to the rail trail. I have walked by, I have noticed this building. And even if you look on Google Maps, you can see it from the head of the rail trail. And it's not the most beautiful back in the world, but it's currently not the most beautiful backside of the building either. So I have no particular problem with creating headspace back there and making this a more livable structure. So the only other comment that I would have, I also don't lament the loss of the chimney in the back, as long as the other two are preserved. The only other comment that I have is material selections. No, I have two comments. Material selections, I can't remember who it was that commented on it earlier, but hardy plank or any other synthetics or whatnot would be a shame to see them come up here on this building. And the last comment I have is I'm always suspicious when we see elevations and drawings that lack sufficient detail in terms of dimensions. We essentially have one dimension carried through from one elevation to the next, which is the overall height of the building. And that, while we can get an idea of the relative changes by using different marker points, lintels, and things like that, where are the dimensions? So those are my comments. I am against the idea of expanding the windows. I do want to maintain original materials, and I have no real problem with the back of the building. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan.
Yes, I would echo everything Commissioner McNamee just said. I think that preserve the front. I don't find that the proposal for the back, I don't find that that's going to be is going to be I think it will be an improvement in terms of the actual renovation / restoration work. Even though we lose the chimney, we don't see the chimney from the outside. It's an interior detail. I mean, we don't see the fireplace, the historical fireplace. I don't know how that fits into the interior changes and alterations to the design of the floor plate. I think the main thing that bothers me is that by raising the roof, you cover more of the gable. The gable on the original house in the rear was I mean, it is a historical feature. To cover more of it by raising the roof is, I think, could be a minus for the design. But I don't know how to raise the roof of the shed and preserve that one zone, that one corner, so that we keep it from intruding on the gable end. Yeah, could you show the rear elevation one more time? Let's take a look at that. So I guess in the existing design, the way the roof is placed, it preserves the entire gable. By raising the roof, you have this strange relationship wrapping the gable. So I think it destroys an architectural feature. We might want to rethink that. Maybe Mr. Primack could rethink that somehow to avoid that clash. I don't know what the solution is, but there might be one.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Carnwath?
Yeah, I'm inclined to say I'm not necessarily worried about the back. I think it's okay. I think the focus for me is the front, and try, if possible, keeping the windows the same. And that's all I have, really.
Okay, thank you. I agree with Mr. Morgan about the problem of wrapping the gable. I think the roof change should not be so extreme, and the slope should be preserved to sort of imitate the existing profile. This house definitely needs some exterior restoration work, but it's such a grand house. I also agree with Stephanie Nikotich that the rail trail is a public way. I believe that Mr. McNamee said the same thing. And I wish that the house would have true divided light windows on the rear elevation, actually. I will agree with Mr. Morgan that there needs to be a conditions report and we need to see the dimensions. I can assure you that the front elevation windows don't have to be replaced under the existing building code. There's not a mandatory demolition requirement in Massachusetts that would force owners of historic homes to demolish character defining architectural features. So you can save, the time and money of doing that. And please confirm this with our building commissioner. The proposal now says original windows will be kept and or replaced where needed. So I want to point out that the city has historic window restoration guidelines. So for me, a condition would have to be that the applicant would consult a window restoration expert, and we can recommend a few in determining whether a window really was beyond repair. I agree with Mr. Coulter, John, that 12 over 12 on the second floor in the front would alter the size and shape of the glass panes and look wrong. And they should stay 12 over 8 true divided lights. And I also agree with Mr. McNamee that the materials are going to be very important. It's important to retain and restore the original clapboards and all existing window and doorway trim and detail. Given what you've heard in our deliberations, would you like to take a couple, not more than 2 or 3 minutes to say anything else you'd like, and then we'll invite the public to do the same.
Yeah, sure. As I said, it's in my presentation, and I absolutely expect to fix the existing clapper and keep it. I think it's a 3-inch reveal, which is very rare and will be very expensive to do, but we have absolute plans to do it that way. As far as keeping that, we did what we could to keep that gable. We were looking at maybe extending that all the way across and getting rid of that gable, but I knew that you wouldn't want that. So we did whatever we did what we could to just get some ceiling height out of that second floor and still keep that gable so that you can see it. I know that often historical, you guys like to see where the old section was and what the new section is. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here as well. The other aspect of it is that we had to get that height to get room height. The first floor in the back only has a very low ceiling as well, because the whole thing slopes down. And don't forget, that shed in the back was not part of the original house. The original house had that gable in the back, but it definitely didn't have that shed. One thing I forgot to say about Mr. Coulter-John's comment, there is no intention to make this into multiple use or dual family, whatever. It's a single family. It's going to remain a single family. I think I'm trying to, once again, turn a house that is certainly could be a showpiece. It's right in the center of, neighborhood that people drive by all the time. Winter Street's one of the busiest streets in this town. And I'm trying to take something that looks like it's falling apart and turn it back to beautiful again. I hope you guys agree with me.
Thank you very much. Can we reopen public comment just for 2 minutes in case anyone else in the public would like to
Can I just add one thing?
Sure, yes.
The shed on the back wasn't part of the original structure, as Eric had mentioned. And from the rail trail, you see the roof, and the roofing isn't even, it's a rubber membrane. It isn't even a historic roof. So if we raise the wall up so that we can get more usable space, you'll see more wall, you'll see more window, and you won't see a roofing membrane. Even though we've pushed the roof, we've raised the fascia, and we've raised the slope of the proposed addition or the expansion, you wouldn't see the roofing material when you're standing on the rail trail. And, I think that everybody admires this building. I've lived in the town for many years. You can't help but notice that building, the green color and the purple door. Everybody loves this building. And Mr. Primack is going to restore it to completely restore it so that it has siding that's intact. We would like to keep the same colors.
Yep, can we just move, yes, I understand that. We understand the point about the rear addition. We just have to move on to get public comment.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And I do hope if you return that you will look at the Sanborn maps and show us, because I did see a rear addition to this house on the Sanborn map of 1888, but I invite you to provide information that it is not an historic addition. Can we open public comment? Is there anyone in the public who'd like to speak very quickly so we can move on?
First person we have is Judith Pickett.
Thank you. Ms. Pickett, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, Judith Pickett, 4 Taylor Street. I'm actually the next applicant, but I have friends that live at, on Purchase Street, and I just wanted to say that Mr. Primek, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, I don't want to butcher it, did a lovely job with their home, honored the history, kept as many aspects and window pieces and doors as he possibly could. It's beautiful and it fits and it really honors the history. That's all.
And what did you give us your address? And did I miss
did.
it? 4 Taylor. Okay, that's right. That's why that was so familiar. Thank you. Is there anybody else? Anybody else in the public?
Next person we have is Tom Colderjohn.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Tom Colderjohn, 64 Federal Street. My only comment is that this feels like it's an unfinished process. I would encourage you to impose the delay so that all the details can be worked out and pinned down, especially like the front windows, the measurements that were talked about. It feels like it's unfinished, and that if you could impose a delay, you would have time to work out those details and reach agreement with Mr. Primak about the materials, etc. So I would encourage you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else?
Next person we have is Stephanie Nikitich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephanie Nikitich, 93 High Street. Like Tom Colderjohn, I agree with the things you have mentioned are missing during your deliberations. I agree that you need dimensions, you need material specifications, you need a conditions report, because it would be a shame if what happened to some of the other buildings where everything was fine. I noticed the architect says she hasn't even been in the building. I don't know how you understand the condition of a building without being in it. So I think all of those things are required, and I hope that you will put this into the mode of process where you can get that information. I also just wanted to clarify a comment I had made that Mr. Primak I think mischaracterized. I didn't say that he's not a Newburyport developer. I know he is. He moved into town a few years ago. I said he is not a Newburyport developer known for restoring old buildings. And another person in the comment mentioned an address, which I normally wouldn't do, but may I mention another address, Madam Chair?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. This is one of his most recent projects on Water Street. I believe it's 174 Water Street. So, you know, he has offered to send you the details of all of his projects, and you know, it might be useful to do that and certainly include that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public wishing to speak?
Seeing no other hands at this time, Chair.
Thank you. Let's close public comment. And based on what I heard in deliberations and the question and answer, it sounds like the commission finds sufficient architectural and historical merit in deeming the house preferably preserved. And that because there are concerns about dimensions, conditions, details, materials, and I actually would love to do a site visit to the second floor of the rear addition, that we would need to impose the demo delay and encourage the applicant to return to us after, of course, also speaking with the building commissioner about those historic windows. So can there be a motion that the structure is preferably preserved and the demolition delay is imposed?
This is Peter. I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Carnwath?
Yes.
Mr. McNamee?
Yes.
And I am yes. So the motion passes. The demolition delay is imposed. I'm sure we will see you again, Mr. Primack, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
The next application is for 4 Taylor Street, and the applicant is seeking to demolish the structure and rebuild. Before reviewing the plans, we must determine whether or not the structure is historically significant. The information that we have to make that determination is that the property was built in 1900 as a bungalow-style beach house. The porch was enclosed at some date beyond 1972, according to the letter from the architect, but I think the architect may have transposed the letters, and that photo is really from 1927. And that it is one of the few remaining intact historic Plum Island cottages. Does anyone on the commission have anything to add about whether or not the structure is historically significant? If not, can we have a motion that the house is historically significant and should be considered for preservation?
Yes, I'll move that the 4 Taylor Street house is historically significant and should be considered for preservation.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Is there a second on that?
I'll second it. It's Peter.
Thank you, Mr. McNamee. Mr. Conworth, how do you vote?
I'll go along. I'll say historically significant.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Mr. McNamee?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Now that the house has been deemed historically significant and considered for preservation, let's move on to the public hearing. The public hearing for Taylor is now open, and we invite Judy Pickett and Ken, is it Savoie? I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, to present for 15 minutes in total. Please divide the time however you'd like. We have all studied the application and done site visits in advance of the meeting. So feel free to emphasize the key points that are relevant only to this commission's powers and duties. Thank you.
Good evening. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
All right. And am I on video?
No, you are not. Your presentation is, but your face is not. Is that what?
All right. Well, the presentation is the important part.
Okay.
So this house at 4 Taylor Street was built approximately around 1900 by Mr. Barker, who purchased a number of lots in that area, built 4 homes, all similar sized cottages for his daughters, and named them after each of them, this being named after Elizabeth. All of the homes are no longer intact. This one is perhaps the most intact, although it's certainly been modified over the years. Current owner Judith Pickett has owned the house for several years and has done a number of repairs and to make it more habitable, if you will, during the winter, because it was built naturally as a summer cottage. And she wishes to continue to live in the house in her retirement. In order to make the house energy efficient, suitable for living, because the second floor, I'm 6'2" and I can barely stand up even at the peak of the second floor, requires a total rebuild. We looked at the possibility of lifting the house, but the cost of that, including all the bracing and that would be required, was cost prohibitive. Plus, we'd be left with the same problems that we have today, a poorly built house that has inadequate headroom and inadequate framing. And so we are proposing to rebuild the house. When we spend, as you know, a certain amount of monies on the renovation in a floodplain, we are required to lift the house up beyond the floodplain. Could we move to the next slide? This is the application, so maybe we can move on from here. This is my letter of support, but again, maybe we should move on to the next. This is a locus plan showing the property. It actually is a double lot. Judy also owns the adjoining lot. Our proposal is to keep the house on its current lot, although the two have been combined for zoning purposes, not for assessor's purpose, but for zoning. Next slide. This is the current house location. You can see that there's a shed that adjoins the house that is actually extends over the adjoining property line. That shed will be removed as part of this project. And the next slide, I believe, well, there is another slide that shows the proposed. It might be at the end of this slideshow, but these are existing photos of the cottage. We can go on to the next. More context photos. You can see the amount of space available, and you can look in the background to see some of the construction that's going on in the neighboring property. I believe that, Judy, do you know if that cottage on the lower left was one of the original sister cottages?
I believe it was. Yes.
Yeah. So it clearly has been altered from the original. I think they were probably all built of similar scale, but they've been either removed or they've been expanded significantly over time. This is the last one remaining. You can go on from here. This is an interesting. I thought this photo was from 1972, but you said it was 1927.
I was guessing that it was not 1972. It certainly doesn't look like it. Looking at the chairs, unless people were like really.
Well, I'm looking at the little plastic toy out in the.
Oh, is it a plastic toy? Okay.
That might have been that. Someone gave me that photo, and that's their family used to vacation there.
Yeah, it looks much older than that. Anyway, that's not important, but
right.
You can see how it used to look before the porch was enclosed. Thank you.
Correct, right. And you can see the Elizabeth sign, which Judy has very conscientiously had reproduced and replaced on the front of the cottage, which is still there, and we plan to retain. Next slide. So this is the footprint of the proposed cottage, which is roughly the same size as the existing, but moves further away from the property line, centers it more into the site, and respects the neighbors, I think, views, so that we will still maintain the footprint on the rear lot. Next slide. And these are the floor plans. It's currently, I guess you would call it a 2-bedroom cottage, because there is a makeshift bedroom on the first floor for Judy's mom. And our goal here is to make a real bedroom for her on that level. So the plan on the left shows the stair up to the main floor living space, the bedroom for Judy's mom, and the bath, and then of course the kitchen and dining living area with the deck. There's currently a deck now, but we will replace that, and then a stair up to a new second floor, which would be Judy's bedroom on the second floor, with reasonable headroom and a master bath there and a closet. The rest of the space will be low eave storage. She will also have a deck that will stack over the deck below. And then the next slide shows some of the elevations. Naturally, when you have to elevate a house approximately 8 feet higher than what it is currently there is going to appear significantly larger, which is what we have to do in order to get it above, get the entire first floor above the floodplain. That's, you know, raising it about 8 feet from where the floor is now to where it will be. It's going to appear larger, but we've tried to maintain the, you know, the character of the cottage, yet also allowing for a more usable and attractive home for Judy. She'll have a little screen porch there you can see in the upper right. That will be off of her living space. And then you can see the 2 decks that are stacked one above the other. The next slide shows the other, I think the other 2 elevations, right? The only thing that's not shown in these elevations is the Elizabeth sign, and we're thinking that would probably be going back on the front of the house in that large, underneath that large window that will be a feature element. So that as you ascend the stair from the first floor to the second floor, you'll have a nice view, perhaps of the ocean, at least between some of the homes on Plum Island. And I think the sign will be a nice element to include within that composition.
Can I also add that it has, my house has gingerbread trim cutouts, and we're going to put those back on as well.
Thanks, Judy. Because yes, one of the distinctive features is the scalloped eave and rake boards. And I don't know if you can really pick up from these elevations unless you zoom in, but we do plan to replicate those along in the house on those rakes and fascia boards. And then the next slide shows more views of the proposed. I think you can start to pick up, if you zoom in on those, some of the detail of those rakes and eaves that I was mentioning. Underneath the house will naturally have to remain open for flood purposes. But Judy will have a home that will be high and dry above the floodplain. And that may be the end of the presentation.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Let's open the public comment period. I think everyone knows the drill who might be interested in speaking.
First person we have is Katie Ponting, I think it's pronounced.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, it's Ponting. We're at 11 Barker Street, right next door. And my husband and I are very much in support of Judy's project. And we just wanted to comment to that, and that's it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Next person we have is Justin Ponting.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Justin Ponting, 11 Barker Street. Like Katie said, we're right next door. If you notice in some of the pictures, there's an addition going on right next to Judy. That's our addition. To let you know, I'm constructing that myself. Judy has showed us her plans. We're very much in support of the project. Going back to when I met Judy, the Elizabeth sign, she had it refurbished, and I actually helped her hang that. And I'm sure that the project she's doing is going to honor the house how it is. And we're in full support of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next person we have is Ashley Bhagtiari. I hope I'm not pronouncing that incorrectly.
Yes, this is Ashley Bhagtiari. We live across the street at 8 Barker Street, and we just wanted to come on here and give our full support for Judy's project.
Thank you.
Elaine Nickerson.
Hi, yes, I also sent a letter to the Historic Commission in support of this project. I was a neighbor of Judy's for 6 years as an owner and 4 years before that as a renter on Plum Island. I now live in Newburyport, closer to downtown. And I just, aside from just supporting the project, I wanted just to let you know that Judy has always loved the historic elements of her home and had wanted to pretty much keep it as it is on the ground, only to find out that that was going to be impossible. And she was really disappointed to find that out. So once she found out that she had to raise it and rebuild, she's kept all of the historic elements in mind. She's asked her architect to. And she's been keeping, I mean, right down to floorboards and beams and things that may not be able to be used in its original function, but she's going to keep in some fashion in the new home. And I think that, you know, the Historic Commission should feel confident that she takes it very seriously and is extremely proud to be an owner of one of the original cottages on Plum Island, and will continue to respect that going forward. And that's all. Just want to let you know.
Thank you.
I believe that's it, Chair.
Thank you very much. Then public comment is closed. The commission, do you have any questions?
Yes, Chair, I have a quick question. The last speaker, Elaine Nickerson, mentioned that elements are going to be reused. Are we saying that, and I don't remember hearing that in the presentation, are elements of the original building being moved over into this brand new building?
So I can speak to that, Judy Pickett. I have the original sign that a friend of mine, as Justin indicated, he did an exact replica of it because the original sign was over 100 years old and could no longer be outside. That's a historical rehabilitation, I don't know, person told my friend. So there is an exact replica that Justin did hang. And I have the original. I also, when I moved in, there was a very drafty original stained glass window in the bathroom. The center of it does need to be rehabbed, but those will be put in. And then we talked about the gingerbread trim. I also have some beams in my home that have like just the holes from the old knob and tube, but I love them. And so we're hoping to, you know, just highlight those in maybe the dining area. They're not going to be structural, but they'll honor, we're going to make it, you know, have it the wide pine boards in that dining room area, and maybe, you know, hopefully incorporate those as a design element to honor Miss Elizabeth.
Terrific. Just one other question. The scroll work, is that being replicated or portions of it reused?
It would have to be replicated. It's really in rough shape.
That's all. Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions from Mr. Morgan, Mr. Carnwath?
I don't have any questions. I think it's a nice plan, and I would like to encourage them to go on with it.
Thank you, Malcolm. Mr. Morgan, any questions?
I have no questions. I have a concern
Okay,
that,
let's move into
yeah,
deliberations.
but no questions. Yes.
Okay, let's close that session and then moving into deliberations. Mr. Morgan.
Yeah, so we've determined that it's historically significant. I mean, it is by definition. Now we have to deliberate whether it's preferably preserved, because I mean, regardless of what's proposed here, it's a great, we may think it's a great design, but it's obliterating what's there. And if it's a historically significant building that needs to be preferably preserved, then it doesn't really matter what's being proposed here. We're demolishing a historically significant building that should be preferably preserved. So I guess there's a dilemma here in my mind.
Yes, agreed. Agreed.
Can I address that?
Yeah, please do, Malcolm.
Yeah, I've driven around there and looked at a lot of the houses in the area, and it doesn't look anything like it did in 1900. And I think that this is a nice design. I think preferably preserved is a nice idea, but I think in this situation, in this neighborhood, I'd like to say that I think they should be able to do what they want to do. I don't think it will add, my point is, I don't think what they're planning to do will adversely affect the neighborhood, which is, I think, what we're here to do. Thank you.
I'm wondering, the Secretary of the Interior has guidelines on flood adaptation for rehabilitating historic buildings, and one of those adaptations is moving the structure in situations in which in communities in which there is already the tradition of moving buildings and then moving them to a similar setting. So we discovered on our Harding Street application that Plum Island Beach cottages were even moved into town. So, you know, what I really wish is that if the house isn't going to be preserved, that it could be preserved by being moved. I wonder if it can be, and I guess I probably should find out from the architect if there has been a conditions report. I know they thought it would be difficult to elevate it, but is it possible to donate it, to find somebody who has a lot that would keep it? Is that even possible? I guess that's what I'm thinking of.
May I speak?
Oh, please, yes.
So actually, because of Judy's fondness for the house, our first goal was to see if we could somehow save the cottage and elevate it. I crawled under this building yeah, to examine the structure. It's cedar post, you know, buried in sand, supporting the first floor, which are in reasonable shape, but the framing is clearly inadequate. And then I brought in Ed Boyle, who's done a number of projects out on Plum Island, who you may be familiar with, to ask him what his thoughts were on how we might be able to jack the house up in order to get piles under it. So we'd have to lift the house up, move it out of the way in order to drive the piles, and then set it back on. And the cost of doing that is really prohibitive. It's you know, it's in the neighborhood of $40,000 to $50,000 to stabilize the house, move it, and to move it back on. And then you're left with all the same problems that you have currently. We have not looked into the possibility of someone moving the house, but I would think they would be dealt with the same problems that we faced in trying to preserve, you know, stabilize it and raise it. That it was built, you know, with substandard framing, and it would be very challenging in order to keep it intact enough to move it. Furthermore, though it is a cute house, I don't know that it's all that unique. It's, if you stripped away the enclosed porch, it's basically a 1.5-story gable house. It's a cottage, and it would be fairly easy to replicate. And you could certainly add the detail back into any new cottage. That's why we want to put it back into our reconstruction. But I just don't think anyone would be interested in moving this with the cost of with the cost entailed in that.
Okay, thank you for your response. I appreciate it. Malcolm, Joe, Peter, any other thoughts on this before we make some kind of motion and some kind of vote? If not, then I invite someone to make a motion.
Well, can I ask another question?
Yeah, please.
Do we have any other historical breadcrumbs here that we can follow? Is there, I appreciate most, since it's real, I disagree with Malcolm. I think our job here is not to really determine whether the new design is appropriate to the neighborhood. I think our deliberation really is focused on the existing structure. And I don't think I have enough information to know whether it really is worth preserving or not. And I guess if I don't hear something positive to the effect that this building is worth preserving for its own history in and of itself, then I would say I would certainly entertain demolishing it for better and higher use of the site.
Thank you very much. Peter?
I would agree with Joe on that point. It's a shame to lose the building, but if it's not salvageable, if it can't be moved, then there are better uses for the site. I also agree with Joe in disagreeing with Malcolm. Sorry, Malcolm. Malcolm, one thing that you said is, we should let them do what they want to do. And I think that's a very dangerous precedent to set. So this is an acceptable design, but it has nothing to do with preserving an existing structure that does have some significance. If it can be saved, we should talk about that. If it can't be saved, then we should let them move forward.
Thank you, Mr. McNamee. Would anyone like to make a motion that the house is preferably preserved and we should impose the demolition delay? You motions are in the affirmative. It doesn't mean that you will vote yes or no, but would anyone like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Does anyone second it?
I'll second it. This is Joe Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Malcolm, how do you vote on the motion that the house is preferably preserved and we should impose the demolition delay?
I think that a lot of these cottages on Plum Island were built with recycled lumber, and I think it's different from being downtown, a classic Georgian. And I think I don't want to tie these people up. So I'm saying I don't think it should be preserved.
Okay, so your vote is no. Thank you. Mr. Morgan?
I vote no.
Thank you. Mr. McNamee?
No.
I reluctantly and sadly vote no. It's a shame that we've lost so many of these cottages already, but the project is now released for your new construction, demolition, and new construction. And thank you for your presentation and good luck with the project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The only things we have left is there a motion to approve the minutes of 7/22/21.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, and Mr. Morgan, how do you vote on that?
Yes.
Mr. McNamee?
Yes.
Mr. Carnwath?
Yes.
I vote yes. There are no updates from the chair. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
Yes. Mr. McNamee, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Morgan,
Yes.
Mr. Carnwath.
Yes.
I vote yes. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.